Guys, we have a problem. The boss said that new devil is arriving.
Is he well known?
Famous throughout the world.
And what did they say about him?
They say he is a legend.
That's going to send some shivers down the spine.
This is football heritage.
They have embarrassed, to say the very least, the mighty Manchester United. This, nothing short of humiliation. It's in! It's 7! 2 Derby Day hat-tricks, 2 born-and-bred City fans.
Manchester United aren't even in the Champions League, and they want a God-given right to be in there. They're an absolute joke, and honestly, the time has come now.
We're going to look at all different strategic alternatives, and we'll see where that leads us. So I appreciate you talking to me tonight, and I'm going to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving.
Hated, adored, never ignored. An era loved by the rival fans, less so by those on the Stretford End. This is Manchester United, and these are their banter years. This is a story that is only allowed to be told because of a horse, and it went by the name of the Rock of Gibraltar. Long story short, Manchester United manager Sir Alex Ferguson thought he had the stud right. He's got diddled out of a business deal by the Coolmore Horse Racing Group, who also owned a quarter of the club Ferguson worked for in his day job. That 25% made Coolmore kingmakers and introduced Manchester United and their supporters to the Glazer family. David Gill told fans that debt was the road to ruin, only to sell over £1 million of his shares to someone called Jim O'Neill, who gave them up to the Glazers. Months later, £2.5 million more shares enter Glazer hands through Maurice Watkins, before Coolmore gallops back around onto the final furlong to complete the Glazer power grab by selling their 25%. The Glazers were led by the patriarchal Malcolm, who croaked just as United had endured their worst league season for a generation. Under him, the litter of Joel and Avram, as well as 4 other more irrelevant and just as uninvested, unemotional shareholders of the club. Resignations were called for, including that of Sir Alex Ferguson, in an already lean spell for the club, whilst the breakaway FC United of Manchester was formed. The club teetered on the brink. Payment in kind loans worth £220 million allowed borrowers to pay interest with debt. The club, debt-free for 74 years, was instantly plunged £580 million into the red. Interest on that debt was £63 million for the first year alone. No matter how complicit or quiet they were about the takeover, it is a saving grace for United that David Gill and Sir Alex Ferguson remained in place for another 8 years, overseeing the last embers of a successful football club at Old Trafford. The moment they were gone, however, they were left at the mercy of a banker, and a right f***ing banker at that. He transformed the club, turning £66 million of club revenue from commercial deals into £275 million in the space of a decade. Woodward had given the club free money, he'd bolstered their coffers, and they'd gone from hunting down a quadruple in 2009 to finishing 6th in 2019. Ed Woodward was a little todger working for JP Morgan. Now he was saying, playing performance doesn't really have a meaningful impact on what we do on the commercial side, which was becoming less true by the year. Prolific in the commercial world by the mid-2010s, Woodward had become prolific in the transfer game too, to the detriment of absolutely everybody except the club's rivals. Whilst other clubs ran through a series of scouts, analysts, coaches and the manager as well as a sporting director to finalise signings on a seamless basis, United were not like any other club. Other clubs couldn't dream of doing things like Manchester United, remember. The structure at United for the longest time worked under the following parameters. Manager wants player. Manager gets scouts and analysts to look at the player. An agreement is reached on the player. Manager asks Ed Woodward if they can sign that player. Ed Woodward goes to Joel Glazer for permission to sign that player. If Joel Glazer agrees, Ed Woodward goes to Matt Judge, the club's transfer negotiator, with permission granted. Ed Woodward makes a bid for the player. The club will always reject the first bid because they're not stupid. Matt Judge and Ed Woodward go to Joel Glazer and ask how much they can spend. He tells them. They both go back to the other club with a new figure. They reject again. They return for permission. They get it. They improve the bid. It's finally accepted. And in the meantime,
It doesn't get any better than this. Spurs have 6 and Manchester United
But eventually they'd spend that money, qualify for the Champions League or go to Wembley once in a blue moon and slap each other on the back of a job well done by offering each other millions in dividends. In the background, the training ground's missing a coat of paint and the latest technology, the stadium's leaking, and a women's team took 13 years of Glazer rule to be re-established. It took the near dismantling of the entire sport in England for United fans to sense the green shoots of recovery. The Super League announcement in 2021 and subsequent Glazer backpedalling was so quick and the supporters' voices so loud that Ed Woodward rode all the way back up the Thames and the Glazers explored their exit strategy. It took 3 years and he's still there lurking in the background hoping we don't see him, but does that mean that United are now in a good place? We all have grand designs when we're off to try something new. David Moyes was no different. Think of any premium footballer from 2013 and he had his fingers in those pies. Bale, Fabregas, Thiago, Pedro, Kroos, we could go on but we all know the result. None of these lads turned up and Maro and Fellaini did. It turned out to be a good plan B or C, a mode of pure desperation for probably too many managers but didn't do enough to even achieve cult status at Old Trafford. The David Moyes football genius era of Manchester United broke plenty of records. A first defeat at home to Newcastle for 41 years, a first home defeat to West Brom since 1978, only the second exit from the first hurdle of the FA Cup in 30 years, as Swansea won for the first ever time at Old Trafford. By the time Champions League football was confirmed to not be taking place at Old Trafford, David Moyes had helped Everton to a First League double over United, which wasn't anything he could come close to doing whilst he actually managed Everton. As a very literal Grim Reaper loomed large over Moyes, the axe was swiftly wielded as a first campaign without Champions League football in 19 years was sealed with the limp Goodison Park defeat. It would go on to be the worst Manchester United performance in the Premier League era, but only the worst Manchester United performance in the Premier League era so far. A semi-final in the All Capital One Cup might have been something to clutch onto if only United hadn't contrived to participate in the worst penalty shootout in competition history, losing to Sunderland in the home second leg. Still, it is David Moyes who can boast, and that's a strong word, that United's best Champions League return since 2012.
Manchester United's long run in the Champions League has come to an end. After 18 consecutive campaigns in Europa League competition, United are now almost certainly out of next season's Champions League.
A fair enough result perhaps, but then again he was dug out of a massive hole by Robin van Persie when he scored a hat-trick when elimination against Olympiacos appeared on the cards in the last 16. Why did Moyes fail? There were rumours of him showing Rio Ferdinand clips of Phil Jagielka. There were the Moyes press conferences where he said they needed to improve their passing, shooting, dribbling, breathing. There were press conferences where he needed to emulate the other team in Manchester. We've covered the backstage happenings enough, but on the pitch, Moyes was hardly handed the team of the century. In each of Rio Ferdinand, Patrice Evra and Nemanja Vidic, they had the heartbeat of a defence that had won everything for the club, but a defence that was all coming to the end of their career at the same time. Combined with Wayne Rooney exiting his peak years and Paul Scholes' retirement, a hardly vintage title-winning squad was already heavily diminished. Factor in a club with no experience in handling a manager who was anything but the best ever, and Moyes' 6-year contract didn't even make it an entire way around the sun before being torn up in late April. The pattern established, it is from here on in that Manchester United find themselves trapped on the endless roller coaster. Louis van Gaal was hired, a name from the past but a successful one, and one that couldn't start pre-season on time because he took his Netherlands side to the semi-finals of the World Cup in Brazil. He wasn't the first choice because United stumbled over that first choice, Jurgen Klopp. Of all people to handle this tour of a club, Ed Woodward was given the task of showing Klopp around, at which point the would-be Liverpool legend called the unit an adult Disneyland before returning to the safety of Dortmund. Before he'd gone, Moyes had gotten Juan Mata through the door and all but got the signatures of Luke Shaw and Ander Herrera, a sign that he was beginning to find his feet at the club in terms of the transfer market as well as others. Now with a change in the dugout, that planning went violently out of the window. It was a splurge that a 2003 Roman Abramovich or a Sheikh Mansour without the weight of FFP would be proud of. Angel Di Maria was the headline name from Real Madrid to fix an area of the pitch that didn't need fixing. Meanwhile, Radamel Falcao added to the bloated names up front. Two of the world's best on their day, Di Maria soured on the club instantly and Falcao remained unfit throughout. Between the pair, they netted 8 goals in 61 appearances, never to be seen again in a red shirt. If players like Daley Blind and Marcos Rojo were supposed to infuse the supporters, those flickering embers were profoundly extinguished with a second-round League Cup humiliation to MK Dons. Still, once the 3-5-2 was ironed out and the club and Van Gaal got used to each other, at least Champions League football was assured after a miniature flirtation with a title race that was never ever going to happen.
With sex masochism. I think the first half we played like Queen's Park Raisins. Louis van Gaal's army!
Superficially seemed to have progressed a level the continued clear out of fringe players who served Sir Alex Ferguson well into the Champions League was in place of another good old spaff in the transfer market. Memphis Depay, Bastian Schweinsteiger, Morgan Schneiderlin, Matteo Darmian, Sergio Romero and Anthony Martial all came in. None of them made any sort of impact and by December the idea of Louis van Gaal and Manchester United was as good as done. A Champions League group stage elimination can be forgivable, although they did have a group featuring Wolfsburg, CSKA Moscow and PSV Eindhoven, and it couldn't have been kinder if it tried. And then there were the 3 defeats on the spin against Bournemouth, Norwich City and Stoke City. Again, maybe you are able to spin that a certain positive way. But the biggest crime was the turgid football on offer. Old Trafford saw the least goals in the division by some margin, so at least the club weren't getting slammed on a weekly basis. But United also participated in more 0-0s and 1-goal wins than any other team. It took until February the 2nd for a United player to score in first half normal time of a Premier League game at Old Trafford. The club's reliance laid heavily on Champions League income, and with a loss to West Ham in the season's final week, they surrendered their top 4 berth. They could no longer keep topping up their credit in the bank through exciting blockbuster transfers that made Sky Sports News wet and give people like Kaveh Solokol a job. So despite the FA Cup trophy in 2016, Louis van Gaal was sacked because you can't be buying champagne footballers on a budget fit for a can of Fanta. If you subscribe to the idea that Van Gaal was perhaps a little too over the hill, there could be no complaints with the next man through the door, Jose Mourinho. It seemed like a hand-in-glove appointment, a club that has to win trophies and a manager that can't help but win trophies. And trophies he did win. He won the treble, in fact.
He's still going here. He's gone all the way. With 3.5 minutes to play. Ball goes in towards Smalling. He's heading down. It's hooked by Henrik Mkhitaryan. It's another goal. Manchester United have done it.
Alright, it was hardly the rousing nights of 1999, was it? Still, it meant that United's turgid 6th place in the Premier League counted for fuck all because the club stumbled into the Champions League through UEFA's latest nifty backdoor mechanism. United was still spending money, but they were seen to have been more measured. In came Eric Bailly, a wonder kid centre-half at Villarreal turned absolute lunatic in a red shirt. Paul Pogba, back from Juventus and renowned as one of the world's best at Juventus, turned absolute unworkable enigma at Old Trafford. Henrik Mkhitaryan, a tricky forward and absolutely the type of no-nonsense signing United should have been making, but a player that was ruined by Mourinho's abrasive style. In fact, only Zlatan Ibrahimovic could be said to have worked among Jose's first batch of signings. Even then, he didn't last a full season before going down to injury, never to really recover. In his place, Romelu Lukaku, who was the one and only player signed by Mourinho, deemed to have had a modicum of success the following year. Victor Lindelof was too timid as United played mental cop, scared cop at the heart of the defence with Eric Bailly and their deputies Phil Jones and Chris Smalling. Nemanja Vidic and Alexis Sanchez were experienced names through the door, but both could have done with it being 2014 or being signed by a different club. Still, United muddled through, second place in the league, a spot in the Champions League knockouts, and another trip to Wembley in the form of an FA Cup final. On the surface, everything was fine.
2-0, Manchester United are dead. Surely Of the worst nights in their long European history. Chelsea are the FA Cup winners.
And sure enough, those house of cards came tumbling down weeks into the 2018-19 season as Mourinho and Paul Pogba's hate-hate relationship came to a head, and academy talents such as Marcus Rashford and Jesse Lingard could only take the club so far. So Mourinho was sacked after another defeat at Anfield, which featured a goal from Lingard, and it would be United's last away to Liverpool until January 2025. All Mourinho's tenure did, trophies aside, was highlight the glaringly obvious: Manchester United wasn't fit for purpose.
This is football heritage.
They still had a banker in charge of transfers, whilst Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola were handed people like Michael Edwards and Tiki Begiristain and structures like FSG and CFG. Mourinho asked for more central defenders. He received a young Diogo Dalot and Fred. Ed Woodward's tired ankles made another pivot to a whole other arena. We'd had the chosen one, the 90s legend, the serial winner, all with completely different playing styles, it has to be said. And now it was the time for the former player, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, a man who, for his experience in getting Cardiff City relegated and at Molde in his homeland, wouldn't be anywhere near the conversation if he didn't rattle in goals for the club in the not too distant past. It was all very predictable. The football was admittedly exciting, it was better, it was more Manchester United, quote unquote, as the club launched into a full parody of itself. Solskjaer matched Moyes' achievement in the Champions League in reaching the quarter-finals.
What a start that is for Manchester United in Paris! Gosh, have some of that!
He even got to relive his night in the Camp Nou, but this was less heroically, as Barcelona wiped the floor with United. In truth, that was the epitome of Solskjaer's Manchester United. They'd become a bit underdoggy, extolling the virtues of a United team with rapid football but shunning the weight of the shirt when a better team, usually in a semi-final, turned up and they fell to pieces.
And Manchester United, who arrive with such big hopes, find themselves sunk.
Before a first final was actually achieved in making the Europa League in Gdansk against Villarreal. It was a match that either way was going to be pivotal for the club. After 21 successful penalties, David De Gea flaked, and that was that, the beginning of the end of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer at the club. They'd got to within 12 points of Manchester City, qualifying for the Champions League for a third straight year in the process, and there was a transfer policy that was clearly working. Solskjaer targeted young British players in Jadon Sancho, Dan James, Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Harry Maguire, combined with the odd superstar in Bruno Fernandes or Rafael Varane. Just forget about the pointless transfer of Donny van der Beek and the shunning of Romelu Lukaku out of the club in favour of an aged Edinson Cavani who struggled to get up to speed and or fitness. But no, it wasn't this strategy that killed Ole's time at the club, nor in truth the disappointing defeat to Villarreal in Europe. It was the return of one man.
A sight most never thought they would see again. Cristiano Ronaldo walks out of the Old Trafford tunnel wearing the famous red shirt of Manchester United again. Ronaldo!
He scored goals, great for his statistics, but almost certainly it can be said now, more harm than good was performed with his signing. United won nothing, but Ronaldo bagged himself 24 goals as Solskjaer was knifed in November. Ralf Rangnick ultimately an interim before a proposed step upstairs in a bout of clear thinking for once at Old Trafford. Unfortunately, Rangnick held a mirror up to the club. His vow of performing open-heart surgery on United was met with a quizzical "we're fine" by the higher-ups who were more busy counting their dividends. So everyone went around that roundabout once again. This time United went for, we're going to be smart now. That meant hiring a director of football that nobody had heard of before or since, binning off Ed Woodward for his part in the Super League, and hiring a manager that was well thought of and had good principles. Good principles that were tossed out of the window when he realised he'd looked out on a bunch of toxic players. Still, he recovered, even went for the king when he bowled Ronaldo out to Saudi Arabia and won a League Cup, as well as qualifying for the Champions League. There was even talk of an ownership change. For the first time, this endless roundabout seemed to slow somewhat with the appointment of Erik ten Hag. There was still nonsense in the transfer market, Casemiro and Antony. The roof still leaks, but trophies were trickling in with it. In the more pessimistic days, it feels like no matter who controls the footballing accounts and decisions, the lunacy continues. After shopping around Europe for a new manager despite their current one winning his second trophy in 2 seasons with the FA Cup against Man City nonetheless, the new co-ownership group fronted by Jim Ratcliffe told Erik ten Hag he was staying. Not only that, but they offered him a bunch of money to stay. All the while the club was working overtime to secure rights to Dan Ashworth's contract, paying him out early to become sporting director. In a quick 1-2, these agreements were reached. 5 months later, in another startling 1-2, both Ashworth and ten Hag were gone. This still with the stench of ticket prices rising mid-season to £66 a person, no matter their age, loyalty or fixture. This still with the stench of paying off hundreds of staff in redundancy payments after paying yet more hundreds of millions in a transfer market for a manager they didn't really want after spending 50 more million to replace both manager and sporting director and to get rid of the legendary manager from the background of his ambassadorial roles. On more optimistic days, there's the knowledge that they have had their first manager through the door, and he is a manager that is deemed to be the selection of everyone within the new hierarchy. There's a knowledge that everyone in a new job or environment is allowed at least one wobble, and Ineos have used up their wobble. In Ruben Amorim, there is a confident football manager, which is by no means a rare unicorn when it comes to Manchester United in these banter years. What is, however, a manager at the forefront of the coaching game that is stuck to his beliefs and principles in riding out what has been a tempestuous start to his new job, and there seems like actual attention is being placed on an ailing infrastructure. There is a pathway to a newer or improved stadium, to better facilities and to a better football. It just needs more patience than ever. So I'm telling you, there's a chance they could return to what they were. Whether or not Amorim can return the club to this particular pinnacle remains an almighty long shot.